BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Black Box Ned 88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to our latest segment in our series, Zodiac Killer Hoax Theory Open Discussion. And as you'll see, this is listed as part 4, but if you haven't heard the previous segments, now is a great time to jump into this. And I have to stress once again, this wasn't meant to be a multi-part series. There was a little bit of a malfunction in part 1. So then I thought we can't just leave it with some type of cliffhanger. So that turned into part 2. And then because the Zodiac killer mystery is just a never-ending rabbit hole, there is more and more things that we keep having to discuss. So that this has turned into a multi-part series. But thank you for listening all the same. And once again, if this is the first one that you've clicked on, please keep listening, but I hope you would check out parts 1, 2, and 3 at some point. Let's get right into things, and we'll just have that one-sentence introduction to talk about what the Zodiac Killer hoax theory is. It is put forward by an individual named Thomas Henry Horn, who claims that the murders that happened in 1968 and 1969, which were attributed to the Zodiac Killer, were actually the work of different people. They were perpetrated by different individuals, and one person took credit for it, a Napa County deputy named Hal Snook, Harold K. Snook, frequently referred to as Hal, and he tried to make people believe that this was one person, when in reality, these were different murders, and somebody tied them all together through the letters, the ciphers, the phone calls, and so on. Okay, so what we can say about this is that there are a lot of things for and against multiple perpetrators in the Zodiac Killer mystery. There are a lot of things for and against multiple letter writers even. But I did something today that is perhaps not the most recommended thing to do when you're trying to learn new facts and pieces of information. I went on Reddit, and I found somebody posting something, here's a good rebuttal to the Zodiac Killer hoax theory. And I was like, well, I want to see what this is. And what was it? A link to Michael Butterfield's 8-part series on the Zodiac hoax. And as well, it's a rebuttal, it's a refutation, it's a rebuke, it's whatever you'd like to call it. It's a challenge. And sadly, that was the material that we were discussing in the previous segment, as well as a little bit in part 2. The only problem is, though, I was not impressed when we went through Michael Butterfield's 8-part article series. He has 8 short articles about the Zodiac Killer hoax theory. But one point that we did not mention in part 3, and this is the last thing that I'll say about it so we don't just keep talking about Michael Butterfield, ZodiacKillerFacts.com versus Thomas Henry Horn. Those two can fight it out on their own. It's that the strongest criticism that Michael Butterfield makes against Thomas Henry Horn's Zodiac Killer hoax theory is actually the most complimentary thing. In part 8 of his article series, once again, there are 8 short articles that he's written about this. He says that if everything that Thomas Horn says is true about Hal Snook, if everything that he accuses him of being true is like fact, then Hal Snook is guilty of things such as obstruction of justice, as well as conspiracy to commit murder. So in that sense, Hal Snook is the Zodiac, and he is the Zodiac just in a different way. And when I was interviewing Thomas Henry Horn, I even asked him, like, what would you really say about the activities of Hal Snook? It almost seems like you're presenting him as some type of serial crime scene destroyer and interferer in Sky. What really would you call that? And Thomas Horn said, co-conspirator. And that's exactly what Michael Butterfield shared in his article. Butterfield's perhaps a little bit sharper than I am with some of these things, connecting the dots and such. He's a co-conspirator. So Butterfield's biggest claim is, this is not the great Zodiac Killer hoax. This is not the myth of the Zodiac Killer. This is the great Zodiac Killer co-conspirator. But that's actually something favorable in line with Horn's theory, because that's just a label. I mean, to add in some of the details into the theory, some of the accusations that Horn has made, allegedly, is that perhaps Hal Snook could have been involved in the plotting and planning of the Lake Berryessa stabbing on September 27th of 1969, that it could have been an accomplice of Hal Snook's, one of his associates, or possibly that Hal Snook was involved in some way of the planning of the shooting of Paul Stein on October 11th of 1969, or possibly even then Hal Snook was the shooter himself on October 11th, 1969, that he murdered Paul Stein, that would go beyond the co-conspirator level, and that would actually make him a murderer. But what Butterfield was simply saying is just that if everything is true in Horan's theory, then Hal Snook is the great Zodiac co-conspirator, not a hoaxer. But, I mean, I'm sure Horan would take that and run to the bank and just be like, now, wait a second. I mean, it's about the events that happened, not what you're calling it. And I'm pretty sure that the hoax label is mostly just about getting people curious and getting people thinking about that. And we'll say something about that in just a second. But we talked about Michael Butterfield. So now we're going to move on to a different Michael, a couple of them actually. It's a popular name, because ZodiacKillerSite.com, run by Mike Morford, has quite a lot to say about the Zodiac Killer hoax theory and the challenges versus multiple perpetrators in the Zodiac Killer mystery versus a single perpetrator. Now, Thomas Horan speaks very highly of Mike Morford. He always says, his famous line in many interviews, he'll say this, that Tom Voigt is a fraud. Michael Butterfield is a fraud. Mike Morford is an honest guy. And the thing that seems to be understood is Mike Morford does not like Horan, but Horan thinks that he is honest. He just disagrees with him. And I was on ZodiacKillerSite.com. And the first thing to say is that I couldn't find the exact post that was written, and I wouldn't even bring this up normally, except for the fact that it was written by Mike Morford himself when he said, "Do not listen to Thomas Henry Horan. Horan is mentally ill." And at this point, I would just like to ask the question, are we dealing with the ramblings of some type of crazy conspiracy guy? I'm almost certain that Thomas Horan would respond to that if he could by simply saying, like, is he mentally ill? I can almost hear his words right now. He would say, yeah, but only in the good ways. So, firstly, I would like to add in some other things because I follow his show, the Stones Unturned podcast, and he talks about some of his previous activities. Horan is definitely an entertainment guy. Prior to being famous for the Zodiac Killer hoax, the Great Zodiac Killer hoax, the myth of the Zodiac Killer, his books on this subject, he was a stand-up comedian, he was a political blogger, he was a music journalist, he worked in various forms of the entertainment industry. And he also talked about one of his big inspirations being reading Rush Limbaugh's memoir, talking about using different sides against the other, the Democrats versus the Republicans, and media perceptions, persuasion tactics, and there are a lot in there. And giving a shout out to Evan from Texas, who addressed one of the points that I had made previously when I was hampering down on the Zodiac hoax theory, because one element in there is that Robert Graysmith is a pure disinfo agent because everything that you have learned about the Zodiac Killer in every documentary and book since 1986 is based on Graysmith's fraudulent narrative. And I was like, that's simply not true. Michael Butterfield even says that in his 8-part article series. That's not true. There's lots of things that happened before 1986. And Evan from Texas added the well-thought-out statement that that's just hyperbole. He's saying it in an exaggerated manner to draw attention to a very important point, that Graysmith was very influential, especially getting many people against Arthur Lee Allen. So, I don't believe that Horan is mentally ill in any type of bad way, and he's not just spitting out some crazy conspiracy ramblings. Perhaps it's rather to the contrary, that he's using certain very precise media persuasion tactics. And even when he talks about, like how he became a political blogger with 200,000 subscribers prior to the election between Barack Obama and John McCain, he's some guy who's familiar with internet persuasion tactics and pitting one side against the other or getting people to think in a certain way. That's what I think that Mike Morford was paying attention to and being very critical of. So, but to go beyond just some of the tactics that are used to present the theory, let's look at a criticism coming at it from a different Mike. We got many of them, and this one is named Mike Rodelli, and he posted on ZodiacKillerSite.com, "The weak thing about the hoax theory is the power assertive profile of Zodiac not only explains the crimes and the manner in which they were committed, but also the killer's need to boast about them through phone calls and letters. So the letters and crimes make sense when viewed as a single entity committed by a power-assertive killer. The profile captures both sides of the case." And that is once again from Mike Rodelli, author of The Hunt for Zodiac. Okay, now, what do we say about this here? First, I would like to say that Mike Rodelli will know the Zodiac Killer mystery better than I will ever know it. But the other thing to say is that after discussing some of these things, I kind of have to go in the opposite direction, talking about the power assertive personality. And maybe we're just looking at different sides of the ink blot, different views on the Rorschach test here, but I preferred the point of view that in the Zodiac Killer mystery, you have three crimes that involve the victims killed by gunshot: Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, and the Paul Stein murder in Presidio Heights. Now, somebody left this comment in the comment section once when they just said the Zodiac was a rather cowardly murderer at Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, and Presidio Heights, firing gunshots at people who were in very vulnerable positions, sneaking up on teenagers in the dark at Lake Herman Road, or with the murder of Paul Stein, shooting the taxi driver, you'd like it once again, right behind him. I mean, with his back was toward the Zodiac. So it's like he was describing him as a cowardly murderer. And when it comes to this power assertive personality, the thing, though, that, like I said, maybe we're just looking at different sides of the same issue, but power assertive killer, I can only really see that at Lake Berryessa when the Zodiac is face to face with the victims. The Zodiac has walked 200 to 300 yards in open daylight, and then puts on the costume that has the Zodiac symbol on the front, the hood, as it's referred to. He points a gun at the victims, and then he instructs Cecilia Shepard to tie up Brian Hartnell. Next, the Zodiac proceeds to stab the victims once they're both tied up, bound, practically hog-tied, with the feet tied to the hands. They're in a very vulnerable position nonetheless. However, the Zodiac did have a long conversation with them at Lake Berryessa, as well as giving them the opportunity to look him dead in the eye, even though the Zodiac was behind the hood with the clip-on sunglasses. Lake Berryessa is very different, and that is also the only crime that occurred during the daylight, as well as the only crime that occurred where the victims were murdered by knife, and the Zodiac even wrote "by knife" on the car door at Lake Berryessa. Allegedly, unless we're going to go down some different pathways with the Zodiac hoax theory. But there's a lot about that on ZodiacKillersSite.com. If anybody would like to really hear it, a lot of people going back and forth about all of the possibilities. But there's just one more thing that I would like to read, and this is coming to us from David Aronchuk, who perhaps is more famous for the ciphers, but he's jumping in on something here with the psychological profiling. One trait I encountered with Thomas Horan is that when you present information that directly contradicts something in his theory, he will take ownership of the new fact and incorporate it into the theory somehow, while thanking you for helping to bolster his claims. It's a rather sly technique of self-delusion. But the problem with this is David doesn't provide any examples. However, he does post an advertisement for ZodiacKillersCiphers.com, and if anyone wants to hear more about his stuff. So what I would say is that he doesn't provide any specific example of when Horan would be doing this. And another point, though, is, as you hear, this is an open discussion. We do this all the time as well here on the channel. If somebody presents you with new information, perhaps you can look at it in a particular way, and you can learn about it in a new way. When you're looking at the overall possibility of the Zodiac Killer murders being committed by multiple people, and not only multiple people committed them, that's the rather unique thing about Thomas Horan's hoax theory, or the co-conspirator theory, as Butterfield would want you to think of it. They were committed by multiple people, but in a disconnected way. And you would have one person, Harold K. Snook, a.k.a. Hal, would have united this through a series of letters. And I'm not 100% convinced that everything is true, but what I would say, though, is that there are ways you could find that out. I mean, let's look at fingerprint and side palm print testing on the letters. If they could do it for Arthur Lee Allen, they must be able to have something from Hal Snook so that we could see. Because not only that, you can get on Google Images and you can pull up the handwriting comparisons of Hal Snook and the Zodiac Killer, and you can see the similarities in their writing. So there are samples. Plus, Hal Snook's family is still around, and I was just reading his obituary from 2010 a couple weeks ago, and they're talking about his family as well. What the thing that Horan says though about Hal Snook's family is they refuse to talk about him. Do I think that Hal Snook would have had the personality to pull this off? Contrary to Aronchuk and Rodelli, I mean, mostly Mike Rodelli's statement. Yeah, absolutely. I think that Hal Snook would have had the personality. And we did a larger upload about this called, well, just on the personality of Hal Snook. Thomas Horan wrote the notes for that, by the way. He has contributed a lot to this program. But the thing to say is about that, some of the things about how being a gifted underachiever, that we're talking about Hal Snook, that is, being a gifted underachiever, being too friendly with his subordinates in the military, and then being relieved of duty, always having to be the big fish in the small pond, never really accepting just that he has to climb the ranks. He just always wants to start at the top, as well as some of the other things like writing letters to the editor complaining about movies and such. And then you have things like the Exorcist letter. That is actually the explanation that I have found why there was this halt in Zodiac activity 1971, 72, and 73. Because after Hal Snook retired from the police force, he developed a couple of hobbies. One of them was collecting fish fossils and making displays out of them. And the other one was he wrote letters to the editor very frequently complaining about things of sorts. And perhaps he just thought that The Exorcist was something that the Zodiac would remark that was the best satirical comedy I've ever seen, the Zodiac said in the letter. He thought that's something the Zodiac persona would have said. Now, an interesting comment has come in, though, on the personality of the Zodiac Killer that we had, and I don't have it in front of me, but I would just like to say that someone was talking about how it appears the Zodiac was in character mode. When either if you're going to go down the hoax theory and say that there's a person writing the letters and it's Hal Snook, or you're going to go down a different pathway and say that there's a single perpetrator involved, then this person is in character mode. And whoever is behind these letters and perhaps some of the other things like the phone calls or creating the ciphers even, this is a character. This person was not talking like this in day-to-day life. This is Hal Snook speaking. No, like, this person, it was really trying to do things in a very different way, so they wouldn't be caught, so they wouldn't have been detected, as well as also, that's one of the reasons why somebody would do this in the first place. Acting out destructive fantasies that have been accumulated over the years from magazines, comic books, movies, literature, all of these destructive elements. The kind of person that's sitting back and watching a movie, eating popcorn or deviled eggs, whatever they ate in the 1940s and 50s, and they're thinking, hey, look at this murderer on the screen. I could kill people better than this guy if I ever got around to it. And the murders were strategically planned post-1966 for sure, after the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. Because we did an upload recently on the channel called Did the Zodiac Killer Murder Sherry Jo Bates, we had a lot of people pushing the possibility that the Zodiac Killer wrote the confession letters, but the Zodiac Killer did not commit the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. And then you can just as easily think about, was the person writing the Zodiac Killer letters, no matter who it was that person trying to test the waters? What's going to happen if I write a letter or 3 letters or 4 letters for a crime that I didn't commit? Because there were multiple letters mailed that said, Bates had to die, there will be more. There were multiple of those mailed. So what I can say about that is that, I mean, it's possible. I certainly don't have 100% certainty. And we can definitely note that there are a lot of similarities between the letter writing and the murder of, and the Zodiac Killer letters, we should say. So, in conclusion with this one, I would just like to say that a lot of people have some strong opinions about the Zodiac Killer hoax theory, but simply because they don't like Thomas Horan's personality, which is somewhat of a confrontational personality, I do admit, but I believe that that is purely intentional on his part. It's almost as if he doesn't want the people to like him. As we said, though, pitting one side against the other, so it creates a type of friction that becomes that has a certain sense of media persuasion value. I mean, if that makes any sense at all. Show business. I mean, But just because they don't like his personality, that should have no bearing on the theory itself, because this is true crime. It's not so much about this is an opinion, this is a belief, this is a standpoint, this is the side that I want to play. This is about what actually happened in 1968 and 69, who murdered Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday and Darlene Ferrin and Cecilia Shepard and Paul Stein, as well as shooting Mike Mageau and stabbing Brian Hartnell. Who was behind these crimes? What was the motivation? How did it happen? What is the meaning that is contained in these ciphers? But one more point that I could say from ZodiacKillerFacts.com that was written by Michael Butterfield is a larger challenge that he has made is something that is almost mentioned. It is mentioned just up and down everything. ZodiacKillersite.com talked about this a lot, and they were just saying that for the hoax theory to happen, you need an enormous amount of people. You need at least 10 or 13 people to be involved. And I don't remember who exactly said this, but they were just like, now wait a second. If indeed this hoax theory is true, which I'm not 100% convinced that it is, then you wouldn't necessarily need an enormous amount of people. What this is rather is people are thinking about this, and then they're like, wait a second, if it's not one person, then it could be two. And then someone's like, well, if it's not two, then it's three, and then not three, then four. It's just ad infinitum. Like, it's just becoming bigger and bigger. And those details might be much more difficult to challenge. Those details might be much more difficult to even prove that is actually how it happened. And the final concluding note that I would say about Thomas Henry Horan stuff is, I think that he is very good at describing the interactions between individuals. And when you talk about the shadow networks of cult-like activity that happened in the United States of America and around the world, what I think that is also putting a very flashy label on the fact that there are interactions between people, and simply documenting and looking at how different people interact and then what is the cause and what is the effect of these interactions. I think it's highly neglected in academia because people are more just like, okay, this is an event and it happened. Academia really pushes people toward a very disconnected approach to things. But that definitely won't sell books, and it definitely won't get people talking. So then there's this big flashy presentation on the subject. But what do you think about the Zodiac Killer hoax theory? I know in this one we weren't so much going through the crime scene step by step, but rather looking at some possible opinions on how the hoax theory was created, or some of the motivations behind why it was created, as well as just genuine criticisms of the presenter itself, Thomas Henry Horan. But, I mean, this is an open discussion, and we will get to some more things in the future. I would like to thank Mike Morford for everything on ZodiacKillersite.com. You can always check that one out. Thank you to Michael Butterfield for ZodiacKillerFacts.com and his 8-part article series on refutations of the Zodiac Killer hoax theory. And everybody who has left any comments and listened to the previous uploads, thank you to you guys too. And if you like this upload, you can hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you're welcome to do so. But most importantly, please drop some comments below. I'll see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.